Hey, good morning. Welcome to Bible Coffee. I'm Travis. This is Bianca, and today we are diving into the fourth gospel in this Advent in the Gospels series to look at how the story of Jesus began in each one. And so each one has been quite different, and this gospel is no exception. So why don't we dive right in? I will be reading from the column on the left, the NRSV. The column on the right is the NIV. You are invited to follow along on either side or in your Bibles at home, or just listen as we read. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me and ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever." And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God. Well, I think Bianca really enjoyed that one. This is a special reading, and you all may have heard of this before, or even if you're only familiar with the First Testament, you may hear some things in here that sound very familiar. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It sounds a lot like the way the book of Genesis opened. And here it is helping us interpret things that happened in the book of Genesis, as the spoken word is how God created. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Yeah, we're talking about the Word. We're talking about God's spoken word. And here in the book of John, we are being taught that Jesus, at least the essence of Jesus, who he really was actually the Word, the method of God to create. There has been a lot of theological conversation, disagreement, and all that jazz throughout the years about who Jesus is. Is Jesus God? Is Jesus a person? And a lot of it is inspired by this very first sentence in the book of John. The Word was God. I remember talking about this in seminary with Dr. Sumney, our New Testament professor. I talked about this passage, and I remember him talking about that this, where it says, or where it's translated as the Word was God, it's really saying something like the Word is of the same essence of God. Jesus is made of the same stuff that God is made of, as the Word is the same stuff of God. It's a part of God. Well, all things came into being through him. Without him, not one thing came into being. Remember, everything came into being in the book of Genesis through God speaking. God spoke, and then it happened. God spoke, and then it was. And this is no exception. And this goes back to that understanding and helps us see Jesus in that light, in that creative purpose of God. Jesus is a method of God creating, a very special, very crucial method of God creating. He said, what had come into being in him was life. The life was the light of all people. That's what God was all about. Remember, God created and it was good. God created human beings and saw everything and saw that it was very good. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And so the light is all about what is good, and the darkness has to do with that chaos that was otherwise there. Well, it mentions John the Baptist briefly, and then it goes back into talking about John more a little bit after this. He came as a witness to testify to the light. He was the precursor to Jesus. Stop yawning, Bianca. This is not that boring. And he came to testify to the light. He came to prepare the way for Jesus, as Isaiah described him of being. All this is kind of in the undertones of the gospel, things that we know from reading other gospels. And as far as these gospels being written, this gospel was the last of the four to be written. The latest in the 90s or hundreds as when this would have been written, a little bit later than the other gospels. Now, as Jesus has been born, this is after Christmas. As we wrap up this Advent in the Gospel series, we know that Jesus has indeed entered the world, and we know, looking back 2,000 years later, where this ends up, that the world did not know him. Even though Jesus had been involved with the world's creation, had been involved with the world from the very beginning, before any of us were here, nevertheless, the world did not know him. The world didn't know such good and such light if it were to smack him in the face. And Jesus didn't smack anybody in the face. Actually, Jesus turned the other cheek and invited the world to smack him in the face a second time. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. And that's getting down to the heart of what this gospel is about. It's about believing. Believing in Jesus, believing in God, believing in good, believing in the light. No matter how much darkness is around. Oh, Bianca's eyeing a spot to lay down. We're going to let her lay down. Okay. And that was a really sad thing. God created this world out of love. God sent Jesus out of love. And despite all this love, the world said, no, we don't want it. And the world killed it off. At least as much as it could. But as we saw here, the darkness could not overcome the light. And the light had to do with him being a child of God. And likewise, it has to do with us being children of God. The Word became flesh and lived among us. We have seen his glory, grace, and truth. And it makes a distinction between Jesus and Moses, because in Moses came the law, but in Jesus came grace and truth. So we find that in Jesus came the full essence of God. Only so much of that essence could be translated through the law, which was handed down and still lives on today. But that's only part of the story. It's not all about the do's and don'ts. It's about real living. So this gospel does not give us the classic story of Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem, of Jesus being born of a virgin. It says nothing about these things, but it does point to them as it talks about Jesus coming into the world. This gospel seems to lean some more on a Greek understanding of the world and talking about the Word, because if you know the Greek philosophy, you'll know what logos is, and logos is what's being said here, what's being translated as word. And so here in the book of John, we're being redirected in how to think about the logos, and to understand that the logos that the ancient Greeks were talking about is really the same stuff that we were talking about in the very beginning when God created, God speaking things into motion, and now in Jesus coming into the world, Jesus being the incarnation of that word. And something about this gospel is it just feels so high Christology to me. If you don't know what Christology is, it's basically the ology of Christ, the study of Christ. And along the common conversations about Christology, the big one is how much God is Jesus. Is Jesus fully God? Like that would be high Christology. Or is Jesus more human, more like us, but with the Spirit of God in him? And that would be a lower Christology. And While the other Gospels have kind of a mix of that lower and higher Christology in them, Mark probably has the most low of the Christologies, and Luke and Matthew are more in the middle, and now this one seems to have a very high Christology, and that's something that's reflected in the development of Christianity throughout the years, as earlier Christians seem to have a lower Christology, and then through Paul and other Christian greats, that has elevated to understand Jesus in a much higher Christological way. As you read the book of Hebrews, there's very high Christology in there. And so this book of John is one of these places that we see as being a very high Christology, because Jesus is just as much God as he is human, and maybe even more so. Now this brings to mind something that I remember hearing. I know it's been written and just passed down to me. I can't tell you what author originally wrote it. But it's about the Gospel of John not necessarily being a high Christology, not necessarily about convincing us that Jesus was God, but rather it's more about God coming down to earth. It's about God being among us. So just as Jesus seems to be lifted into high Christology, so are we lifted up into that high kind of Christology. That God is among us, and God can dwell in us, and then we can become the light in the same way that Jesus was. Now, this isn't that different from other Gospels. We find these things in the other Gospels, but especially here, it's really driven home that there is not this great separation between the heavens and the earth. That God is very much dwelling here, dwelling among us and dwelling within us. And that God's self is presented to the world through us. And as always, we are brought to the question of, where is God speaking to us today? Being different people, seeing this and hearing this in different walks of life, it might strike us in different ways, may deliver messages to us in different places as we need to hear them. But one thing is, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. I was just reading a commentary about this passage, talking about going outside in the dark with a flashlight or even a candle, and how just a little bit of light chases away the darkness. Anywhere that light is shining, the darkness flees. And that's a powerful image for us to think about, especially in light being all that is good, all that has to do with love in this world. Is that really, no matter how much the darkness tries, it could not chase away our light that comes from God. So as we're coming off a very rough year and entering into a new year with hopes that things will be different, and at the same time we know that people are people, we know that we're going to keep running into darkness. Perhaps this is something to inspire us and to move us to keep working at and even work harder at embracing the light in our own lives and being the light in this world that the darkness can't chase away, because there's a lot of darkness out there that itself needs to be chased away. Jesus was in the world, it came into being through him, and yet the world did not know him. We are people of the world, we're people in the world, at the same time that we are people of God. We can understand how the world tries to chase away the light, and tries to chase away good, and tries to let evil run the day. We see that stuff all the time. And perhaps this is some inspiration from God for us not to be those people of the world who were born of flesh and of the will of people, to not be that, but to make that great change, to be born of God, to be children of God as we're called to be born of something else, to be born of that stuff that God created the world with, that stuff of goodness, that stuff of love. So as the Word became flesh in Jesus, may the Word also become flesh in each one of us. May we be born anew in the Lord alone, even as we live in this world. And may the light of God chase away that darkness that keeps rearing its ugly head. Well, I don't know. Thank you all so much for being here. As always, this is actually going to be the last Bible Coffee for a little while. This has been an awesome time. This is now episode number 60. I don't know if y'all been counting. I just keep a little count on my computer. But it seems like a good time to pause on this and move on to something else. So Please stay tuned to the channel, as we still got music and worship and lots of good stuff coming out, but there's going to be more on the way. So please stay tuned and join us again for any new stuff that comes out. As far as the picture contest, we don't have any guesses on what this last set of pictures has been about, so we're going to show you that original one we're asking about. Oh, here's the outside of the building. And then I'm just going to show you a few more pictures of this place. And since this is the last episode, we're not going to leave it lingering for it to be guessed. By the way, Linda, you've done an incredible job, and you have bested me many, many times throughout these Bible coffees using these pictures. So thank you for your amazing work. And sounds like I may be getting the best of you on this time. And I'm just going to give the answer before you end up guessing it, before I let the cat out of the bag. So what this is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So there's this big wall on the outside. It's not this beautiful church from the outside, at least from where we were. And it has this small door that you have to duck to go into. I don't remember the explanation of why the door was small, but you go inside, and there's a statue of the Crusaders. A lot of the stuff goes back to the time of the Crusaders in that area. And in this place, there are two different churches. The last picture I showed you was of the Orthodox side of the church, which is absolutely beautiful. Lots of decorations there on the Orthodox side. And then on the other side is the Catholic Church side. So there's actually two churches, and there is a little courtyard in the middle, and underneath is a cave that they believe was Mary and Joseph's home for a little while they were in Bethlehem. And then, of course, that is where the nativity scene is found that we showed you before, and that's underneath the church, place that you can visit, and what's understood to be the cave where Jesus was actually born. This was a beautiful church, Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the place where the Word became flesh, where Jesus Christ was born to Mary and Joseph, and where he began that incredible life that became the light of all the people. Well, again, I can't thank you enough, and so we'll see you in our next endeavors, whatever and whenever those are going to be. Of course, we got stuff coming out all the time, so we'll see what the next endeavor is after Bible Coffee, as far as some kind of Bible study supplementation in these COVID times of isolation, so we can keep our noses in the Bible and keep our faith growing and our spirits coming to life in the Lord. Thank you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Folks, keep reading those Bibles. Lots of goodness, lots of light in there. May peace be with you.